Deconverted Man here. Sergey Bazelyuk, at least that's how I think I'm going to be saying his name, produced a video called Atheists Do Not Need Evidence for God. That's an hour long. Only I'm allowed to make videos that are an hour long. No, I'm just kidding. So, I'm going to be responding to some of the points that he raises in this video because he did say that he will respond to the video that I make. So, here I go with my response to Sergey and his video, Atheists Don't Need Evidence for God.
Hello YouTubers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about something I call Atheists Do Not Need Evidence for God. One of the biggest things that the atheists do is they claim that they need evidence for God. They always ask you, give me evidence for God. Give me the evidence that God exists. Nobody giving me evidence that God exists, so therefore I do not believe in God. The problem is, it's not the evidence. The evidence, they see it just the same evidence we do. We look at the same thing, we just interpret it differently. They also interpret the Bible differently.
You made 2 points here that I need to focus on. One, that atheists and you, and I suppose the rest of the world, all look at the same evidence, and for whatever reason, we just interpret it differently than you do. Okay, fine. We all look at the same world, and as far as I know, reality is real, so we're going to assume that that's the case. We all look at it, and we all interpret it slightly differently. There's a reason for that, but nonetheless, I grant that yes, different people will look at the same thing in different ways. Fine. The question is not that idea, because we've established that that is a true idea. The question is, how can we determine what way to look at something? So, there are a multitude of ways to look at the same thing. So we have to decide what's the best way to look at that thing. So, one example is St. Elmo's fire. When we first saw this phenomenon, one way to look at it was to say it's supernatural. It's an omen, either a good or a bad omen, depending on who you asked. That was one way to look at it. Later, when we developed science and we got a little bit more skeptical about things, we decided to try to test and understand what created St. Elmo's fire. And there was, it turned out, naturalistic explanations for how and why it formed and functioned the way it did. That was a different way of looking at the same thing. Now, what way is better? One way is based on absolutely nothing other than ignorance. I don't know what X is, therefore X is fill in the blank. That's not an argument. That's, at best, intuitive thinking, and you might guess right by accident, but you won't be right because you haven't studied the phenomenon that you're looking at. So it appears that the best way to look at things is by studying the thing, rather than just assuming that we know what the thing is. Okay, so atheists, theists, skeptics, scientists, etc., all humans will look at different things in different ways, and it appears to be the best way is to study the thing rather than just assume that we know what the thing is. We might guess right, but I'd rather we know what it is rather than just assume that we know what it is. How can you possibly hope to identify something without studying that something? Hopefully we're in agreement on this point. If not, in your response video, simply say, I choose to live in the Dark Ages. Good day, deconverted man, and I won't interact with you ever again. And although people will continue to tell you that you're wrong, you will probably not move forward in your endeavor to convince anyone that they are wrong. Okay, so hopefully you're still with me. And if you are, then the second point you made was about the Bible. Not only do atheists possibly look at it differently than you do, but theists look at it differently. In fact, given the wide amount of denominations that exist, every theist has a different way of looking at it. There is no consensus. There's a majority, perhaps, on how to view certain passages in the Bible, but there's no consensus on how to view the Bible. And there's no system to decide what way of viewing the Bible is the best way. I see that as problematic from a skeptical point of view. Because how do I possibly decide who has the right version of understanding? The best I could do would be to go with the popular opinion, which means that you are in the minority as a whole. In America, the evangelical community is in the majority, but taken as a whole, Christianity worldwide, you're in the minority. The most popular viewing of Scripture is not a literal interpretation. That is something that is only consistent within the evangelical community and something that you'll only see happen over and over again in America in the evangelical community. If you look at the minority Christians in America, you won't see a literal interpretation of the Bible promoted or held on to. And worldwide, you lose out on the majority vote. So, the question here becomes, how do we decide who's right? Now, in informal logic, a majority vote doesn't change what the truth is. But, as I said, since we have no other system, that's the best that I could hope for, which means I have no reason to think that your system is right. More so because essentially you're taking particular Bible verses, insisting that they must be seen in a certain way, and not demonstrating why I or other Christians should agree with you. Why is it seen in this way? There's no explanation given. Not ever. Is the entire Bible meant to be seen as literal? Well, even the most fundamental Christians will say no, because there is obvious poetry in the Bible. So, there is obviously room for a non-literal viewing of the Bible. So, why must it be literal in certain parts but not in others? Who gets to decide that that's the way it's viewed? Also, I think that this fundamental approach ignores a lot of things that other Christians can learn about. It ignores the history and culture of the people that wrote these words in the first place. It ignores the translation errors from the original languages into English. And that is a big problem. Now, I hope that you're not one of these New King James or King James Version only Biblists. They are ridiculous to no extreme, because every other person that I have interacted with that knows anything about the Bible knows that the New King James Version, as well as the original King James Version, are the worst translations available. So if you're one of those people, then in your response video, just say, I will continue to live in the Dark Ages, deconverted man, don't interact with me anymore, and I will have lost you a second time in this video. Or perhaps for the first time if you made it this far. Anyways, look. The Bible has gone through translations, and it has gone through changes, modifications to words. And understanding that is important to understanding what the verses mean. And understanding the people that wrote it and their culture is important to understanding what it means. If you personally, as you suggest later on in this video where you say that atheists know more about the Bible than Christians do, a note on that in a moment, then perhaps you should learn more about the Bible, its history, the people that wrote it, the languages that it was written in, the translations that have occurred, etc., etc. But because you have this particular doctrine, I strongly suspect that you will not engage in such intellectual activity and pursuit of the truth, because your doctrine is not worshiping a god, it's worshiping the book that God supposedly wrote or helped to write, even though the version that we have now is not the original version, and the original version is lost to time. So you're not worshiping God. That's what your doctrine has done to you. And I hope to make this point clear to you, because I don't want you to be in a false doctrine. And that's coming from a skeptic. I don't care if you continue to believe in God. Personally, I'd rather you become even more skeptical and start to doubt that. But I don't care if you continue to believe in God. What I do care about is you believing in nonsense alongside of believing in God. See, I can understand believing in God as a natural byproduct of the way your brain functions. The believing in nonsense, I just don't get. And by that, I mean believing that biological evolution, I'm supposing also the age of the earth, the Big Bang, and other scientific things are not real. That is nonsense, and that is part of the false doctrine that you're adhering to. Back to my note that I mentioned, when you said that atheists know more about the Bible than Christians do, I find that as a stumbling block. If this is the most important book in the world, then why in the world do Christians not know everything there is to know about it? That, to me, indicates that the Christians really don't actually think that it's the most important book in the world and just don't care enough to study their own book. And thus, I could care less what's written in it, because they certainly don't seem to care.
I can say that somebody has very big nose. I interpret that three ways.
You are correct. This is what is known as the natural language problem. There are words in the English language and in other languages that have multiple meanings, and there are words that have the same sound but different spellings, and depending on how we spell it and how we use it, it changes the context of what that word is. There are three twos. There's T-O, T-O-O, and T-W-O. There are two different ones, O-N-E and W-O-N. I won the game, I have one apple. And unless I use the word in context or put it on the screen, you have no idea which one I'm referring to when I say one. You might guess and guess right, or you might guess wrong. And that's a problem with natural language. Certain words have multiple meanings, like the word universe can have multiple meanings depending on what context it's used in. And we also have the added barrier of other language. So I assume that you're not a native language speaker. And I commend you for knowing more than one language. I think that that's an impressive feat. It's something that is, for me, difficult to learn a new language. I'm still trying to learn Japanese. But my point here is, in your natural language, there are going to be the same problems, just in a different way. And you have the added problem of a word that might exist in your language may or may not exist in our language, and vice versa. So we do the best that we can to figure out what we're telling each other. For example, in the Japanese language, there's this word desu, D-E-S-U. Doesn't have any meaning at all in English, period. It is a word that is used for a number of things, and it's a particle term. What the bleep is a particle term? Well, you'd have to study language to really understand what the bleep a particle term is, and I've tried to, and I still don't know what a bleep a particle term is. But nonetheless, if I want to speak Japanese, I'm going to find myself saying des this and des nay, and a lot of times I will say the word des. Okay. But it doesn't have an English equivalent. Nor does the word no in Japanese. The closest we get there is of, or, and. It's like a combination of things. The word no, which is printed as a sidewise E, is not the word no in English, and it doesn't have any English translation. It's another particle term. And I suspect that your language would have similar words or phrases that have absolutely no English equivalent to them. So imagine, then, the problem of Hebrew to English. That's a huge barrier to overcome, isn't it? So, if you have no knowledge of how the text was originally written, or the closest we can come, which would be the earliest copies, which, by and large, I never really have seen the evangel community reference, because they're not interested in truth, they're interested in promoting their doctrine. If you don't know what those say, then how do you know that the Bible that you're reading from is meant to be read in the way that you're reading it? You have no idea, because the words will have suffered through translation problems. The natural language problem that you've identified is reason to think that your doctrine could be wrong.
1 Corinthians 2:14. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. So here you got people who don't know the Bible, don't understand it. They can read the whole Bible cover to cover, and I mean these atheists, they know the Bible. They know it better than we do a lot of times, but they don't understand it because they're just spiritually discerned.
And there's no reason for me to think that your ideas of how to read those passages are correct based on the natural language problem and based on the fact that the majority of Christians do not understand those verses in the way that you understand them. For those two reasons alone, I could reject your position, but I have more reasons that I can reject your position. The biggest one is that you have not given an argument. You have failed to produce an argument. What you have done is the informal fallacy known as circular reasoning. You have referenced the Bible as if the Bible has already been established as being true, and then you are telling me things from the Bible as if they are true. Well, unless you do the very hard work of showing that the Bible is true, I don't care. You might as well be reading a Spider-Man comic and saying that Spider-Man exists. However, perhaps you'll ignore all of those points and say, well, you just say that because you're spiritually blind. Okay, so here's the question. Before you were a Christian, were you spiritually blind? Yes or no? I'm going to assume that you're going to be honest and say yes. Because before you're a Christian, you would have to be spiritually blind if these passages mean what you just said that they mean. Okay. So, you can't see the Bible either. And you say, well what do you mean? I'm not spiritually blind now. Well, yes, perhaps, but how did that transition work? In other words, somebody is spiritually blind, they can't understand the Bible, and then all of a sudden, they can understand the Bible. What happens to make that happen? Well, there's a plethora of possible explanations. The Holy Spirit has to come in you and help you to understand it or whatever. Okay, so if that doesn't happen, then that's not on me anymore. I can try my hardest to understand it, and if there is no divine intervention, I will never get past being spiritually blind. How do I possibly make the transition on my own? If there is some mechanical way for me to do that, then I could use that somehow to become spiritually sighted. So that might mean, I don't know, giving up my skepticism to some regard. But I have no reason to give up my skepticism. So from my vantage point, I'm saying, look, I need some reason to give up my skepticism, and you're saying, just give it up so you can see it my way. And I'm saying, nope, I'm sorry, but unless you come to my level and give me what I'm asking for, I'm not going to let my level go. And you're saying, well, then you're stuck there. Okay, then I'm stuck there. But then that means that I'm always going to be stuck there. Now, for whatever reason, you who were once spiritually blind were able to make the transformation to not being spiritually blind. Perhaps you didn't ever have skepticism, or perhaps the Holy Spirit or something like that helped you to see. But in either case, it's something that I cannot do. So, that's it. We're done. I'm never going to see it this special way because you're refusing to give me what I'm asking for. You're saying, well, it's already all around you. And I'm looking around and I'm like, nope, I don't see it. It's right in front of you. I don't see it. Well, you just have to see it this special certain way. I can't do that, no matter how hard I try, because I'm not going to give up my skepticism and just believe that it's true. I want to be shown that it's true. I don't want to just think that it's true and then somehow I can see it and it becomes true. You might as well say that in order to understand Scientology, you must be a Scientologist. In order to understand Hinduism, you must become a Hindu. In order to understand the Native American spiritualism, you must become part of their tribe. And you must undergo the rites of the various warrior or woman passage rights if you're a girl. In your case, obviously, you're not. At least, I assume so. Okay, so to say you can't understand X unless you're part of X or you look at it a certain way is another logical fallacy known as special pleading. You have to look at it the certain magical way, and if you don't do that, then you won't understand it. That's the same sort of thing that people who believe in pyramid power will say, the same sort of thing that the people that believe that the magnetic bracelets really work will say, oh, but just try them, but they help me, but it works for me, just put it on, and you'll see for yourself. Well, that's not a very good way to test if something actually does something. And when put to the test in a scientific way, those magical bracelets do nothing, the pyramids do nothing, and the people that promote them and believe in them will say, oh, but you're not looking at it right, you have to give up your skepticism. The same sort of motif that is presented here. So, if what you're saying is true, then everyone should stop believing in the Bible. So, hey, thanks for making my argument for me. I guess I can retire now. Alright, a little bit of sarcasm there. Just a little bit. Hope you don't mind. But my point here is, using a logical fallacy such as special pleading to try to get me to see it a different way is not going to happen. I'm not going to give up logic and reason in order to see it a special magical way. What you must do is demonstrate that it is true without just saying that unless you have this special magical spiritual gift or whatever you want to call it, that you're never going to see that it's true. And if that is the case, then it's not my fault. Which is interesting because later you say that it will be my fault because God's given me all I need to know. But it hasn't because it's also blocked me from seeing it. That doesn't make sense. It's one or the other. You can't have it both ways, so there's a contradiction there. And you can make all the excuses you want. Well, but you know that God exists. No, I don't, because God's a spirit, and I'm spiritually blind according to you. So how could I possibly know? See? It doesn't work. So let me suggest a novel idea. You have the wrong doctrine. You have the wrong teachings. You have the wrong idea about this religion. And perhaps the majority view, which is not your view, might be right. Perhaps abandoning this doctrine might be the way to go. That's my suggestion to you. Moving on to the final point that I'm going to cover that you make, because I'm not going to cover your entire video.
You tell him God exists. He'll say God doesn't exist, so give me evidence, and you try to prove him that there is evidence, and you sit there argue for hours and hours on end, which I have done. Okay, I've done it. I was like a fool for doing it, and in the end, he'll say, "Well, God is evil." He'll step on the Christian ground and say, God is evil. I will never worship this God.
Alright, so obviously you said a bunch of things leading up to this, and basically I'll summarize what you said, which is a quote, again, from the Bible that, don't answer a fool for his folly, lest you be like him, blah, 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 blah. Don't care, because, again, you haven't established that your understanding of the Bible is something that I could ever hope to agree with. However, let me address the next point, which is if you ask somebody to prove that God doesn't exist and what the evidence is, etc., you'll get into a debate. And you then said, You were foolish to do that because you're answering them in their folly. So that means you should never ever make another video again, at least directed towards atheists. Because any video that you'll make directed at us is you being a fool. You're answering us in our folly, therefore you're a fool too. So you're no better than we are. So you are not allowed to make any video about atheists or directed at atheists ever again. And in fact, I'll go further, you're not allowed to make any video against any other religion either, because to do so is to answer them in foolishness as well. So if your understanding of this verse is correct, then Christians can no longer proselytize. Good job there. I'm saying that sarcastically, and I hope that you understand why, and if not, let me explain it. The reason I am telling you that you are doing this is so that you see your doctrine is wrong. Christians are told to go proselytize, go tell everyone about Christ, go tell them what Christ has done, etc., etc., etc. Your interpretation of this verse means that no one can do that, because to do that is to answer them in their folly. That the minute you begin to argue with them, then you're a fool. But that makes Paul a fool, because Paul argued with people that didn't believe what he was saying. And the other disciples would also be fools because they argued with people about what they were saying. And it would make Jesus a fool because he debated sometimes the Pharisees about what they were saying and showed, if not them, his followers, why the Pharisees were wrong. Whoops! Might I suggest again that this doctrine is the wrong doctrine, for the fact that it makes everything foolish in the Bible, and it makes proselytizing and speaking out in general also foolish. That's not a thing that you want to do, I would think. Therefore, perhaps you should rethink this doctrine that you're clinging to. Okay, so I do not say that there is no God. I do not say this for a number of reasons. But the biggest reason I do not say it is because I don't even know what God is. Don't start telling me what God is, because I was a Christian, I've been there, and I'm not interested in what you think God is. I'm interested if God is a thing at all, which would require one of three things for me: empirical evidence, a repeatable test, or a logically coherent argument. Now, you've said that we have the evidence, but I'm just not seeing it right. But that's illogical, so I can't agree with that point. You didn't mention any tests at all, so I'm assuming that there are no tests. And so that leaves me with only one possibility, and you have not given me a logically coherent argument, so I'm left where I started from, a position of skepticism. I'm as skeptical about your God as I would think you are about every other God. So, the thing is here, I don't want to get into a debate with you, because I don't want you to be a fool, and because I would win and you wouldn't understand why I had won. What I want to do is implore you to challenge your doctrine, not your belief in God. Leave that alone. I don't care. I would rather you believe in God and embrace the scientific facts of the world than to continue to believe this nonsense. I don't want to make a false dichotomy, a false choice, and tell you that it's God or science, because that's not true. There are plenty of theists out there that have no problem with science, and I want you to be one of them. And the reason I want you to be one of them is because we need science in our world, and we need people to understand science in our world. The thing that you're using to talk to us is a result of science. So if you're really against the scientific theories that we have, then get off the internet and don't use any technology, become Amish, and we won't see or hear from you again. You're welcome to do that, and I would say to be consistent, you should do that. But perhaps you want to rethink your stance on these issues. You deny biological evolution, you deny the Big Bang, I assume the age of the Earth, not because you understand these things, but because you think that these things mean that you must be an atheist, which is not true at all. I embraced biological evolution as a Christian. I continue to do so as a skeptic, and because I'm a skeptic, I'm also an atheist. There is no false dichotomy there. There is no one or the other, and whoever told you that is lying to you. I really, really want you to not believe in biological evolution. I want you to go study it and find out what it says, why it says it, and what it's all about. I want you to study the age of the Earth. I want you to study cosmology. Now, you might get people in text comment or video format making fun of you for any number of reasons. Maybe they'll make fun of your accent, or your voice, or the way you look, or your room, or what, or the weird changing of camera angles. How the bleep are you doing that? What are you, like, levitating the camera up there? How are you doing that? Anyways, who cares about all that? That doesn't matter, because it doesn't affect your presentation. What I'm going after is not you, the person, because I don't know you. I'm going after the argument you try to present, which is not an argument, and I'm trying to demonstrate to you why it's not an argument. But even more important to me is your denial of science, because that goes against the Bible. And you might wonder how. There's a verse talking about don't create a stumbling block. Well, that's what you're doing. You're one more stumbling block. If I'm supposed to choose between science that I know produces results and I know I can trust to a certain degree and that I know explains things versus just believe it, I'm going to go with science every time. And if that's the dichotomy that you want to create, then you'll never convert me personally. You'll never convince me personally. I don't know about other people, but you certainly will never get me, and you will be doing something against the Bible, which then proves to me that you really don't care what the Bible says. You care about what you think that the Bible says and not what it really says, which is funny because you were blaming the atheists for doing just that they were looking at it the wrong way, when it's you that's looking at it the wrong way. As someone that was a Christian, I think I am as qualified as anyone else to tell you that your doctrine is wrong. And because your doctrine is wrong, you're going to understand things the wrong way. Maybe there's a God. Maybe it's the Christian concept of God. But to deny the scientific understandings that we have come to is to tell God that it's a liar, because it's given us data and evidence and information about how the world is and how the universe works, and you're saying that somehow is not the way it is, which means what we're finding out is a lie, which means God's a liar. He's a trickster God. He's Loki, which means it's not your God after all, which means nobody should be a Christian. So again, the entire doctrine that you have destroys Christianity, which is fine from the skeptical point of view. We know that fundamentalism will destroy itself inevitably and ultimately. So if you want to maintain faith in God, I would say it's time to switch doctrines. If you want to be just another stumbling block along the way, continue to do what you're doing. And your video response to me should be, Deconverted Man, I want to stay in the Dark Ages. And you will receive endless criticism that you won't understand and you won't accept, and as we move forward, you will be left further and further behind and look more and more ridiculous. That's your choice. We don't have empirical evidence that I can see as empirical evidence without invoking logical fallacies. He offered us no test, and finally, he offered us not a logically coherent argument. And until we have a logically coherent argument, we must continue to be skeptical of his conclusions.